a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube with inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching the outside of the sphere.
Oh, got it! Woohoo!
Roger. There's troubleshooting as soon as I
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Billionaire John Caldwell once said, "If I'm lucky, I only get recruitment wrong 70% of the time." But how is it we accept being wrong so much of the time? With the cost of finding the right match for both people and organisations so high, it's imperative that you choose the right team to help you on that path. Recruitix is one of the fastest growing recruitment companies in the UK. With an expert team of dedicated, passionate, high experienced professionals, they are the perfect choice to make sure you get it right, first time, every time. With a range of departments covering almost all sectors, it doesn't matter if you need a highly specialised IT professional, a boots-on-the-ground salesperson, accountant, mechanical engineer, or anything else, they have the expert team in-house to ensure you find the resources you need. As a friend of the podcast, they will offer all new organisations wanting to give them a try heavily discounted fees to 10% of per annum salary, representing an enormous saving compared to the rest of the market. Just visit recruitix.co.uk, that's recruitix.co.uk, leave your details, tell them the podcast sent you, and one of their expert team will be in touch. Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy. Just before I bring in my guest, I want to say thank you to everyone for listening in what is the week of the 2-year anniversary of the podcast. Confirmed already for May is Professor Garry Nolan. Some of you may know that, and just confirmed last week with me, Jeremy Corbell will be joining me on the 3rd of May for a conversation too. So a couple of really big guests in May, following on from the guest I have with me today. So email any questions for those guests to ufouapam@gmail.com. Both of those, as you can imagine, are going to be incredibly popular. To my guest for today's pod, making his 3rd appearance for an interview, former head of the Pentagons AATIP program, Mr. Lue Elizondo. Lue, welcome back to the podcast.
Always good to see you guys. Thank you so much, and thanks to your great audience too for having me and spending a little bit of time with us today.
It's always a very exciting conversation, and it's one of those, hopefully we can do it justice for the many people who have sent in questions, and I'm only sorry I couldn't have you for 5 or 6 hours to get through even half of them that have been sent over. Lue, it's been 4.5 years since you resigned from your role at AATIP and came forward alongside a team of others at To The Stars Academy of Arts and Science, as it was known. A lot has happened since then, and as we sit here now, how do you reflect upon that time?
Oh wow. Andy, it's been bittersweet. I never wanted to be in a situation where I had to resign my position in the first place. But unfortunately, that was the hand I was dealt. And as I've said before, a lot of us in national security take our jobs very seriously. In fact, we go to war for it and are willing to put our lives on the line for it. So for me, it was a very difficult decision and a difficult journey, but a decision that really was already made for me because a lot of people that are in my situation, it's not just me, we take an oath, and that oath is to the American people and to our Constitution and our government and whatnot. And what it's not, though, is an oath to bureaucracy. And there comes a point if the bureaucracy becomes overwhelming and becomes a hindrance, an interference, then one has to make a decision. And there's this unwritten code of ethic that we have within national security. If you can't fix the problem, you don't make it worse by staying. You leave and try to fix it maybe from the outside, but you don't want to be disruptive while on the inside. That's not the proper way to do it. So I did what many before me and after me have done. I've resigned. I resigned my position as a matter of protest because I could not get the attention that was necessary on this topic at the time through my chain of command. Now I think people are seeing the rest of the story. There were deliberate roadblocks. I actually could not brief certain elements within my chain of command. simply because of issues involving them, character issues, and other issues. And so what I wound up doing is taking it to the streets, right? And I didn't think that when I left, it would have been received, especially by the one community that was dying for information and transparency. I was really surprised to see a lot of the pushback, if you will, and the disbelief initially. I'm not, as you know, I'm not a ufologist. I'm not into ufology. I'm just a government servant. And what we did was look at UFOs. That's just the bottom line. And when I came out and we had that conversation, I was surprised at the amount of distrust people had in that fact. And I think a lot of it is because in the past the government probably wasn't transparent. Keep in mind, I was relatively new to this. Came into ATIP in 2008, so a lot of the history I wasn't aware of, and nor did I really concern myself with. So for me, it was whether I'm chasing terrorists or chasing spies or chasing UFOs. It's pretty much the same kind of job, really. And so it was only later that I realized that there was so much distrust by the American people and by frankly citizens of the world on this topic because governments, and I say the governments plural, have lied about this topic for so long. And I guess there's a lot of mistrust, and so that was hard. And then, of course, after about a year and a half, the Pentagon began to change its position, elements within the Pentagon. After Secretary Mattis, Jim Mattis, who I would consider, an incredible human being, a friend, in fact. Once he left, they started changing their position because they could get away with it. And those individuals who had held a grudge against me now had an ability to really try to make my life miserable and unfortunately misuse the government apparatus, for example, the public affairs and officers and communication channels like that, to try to discredit me. And that was very, very tough because that really affected my family very much. And I couldn't just come out swinging. There's a right way and a wrong way to do things. So I had to bite my tongue and I had to initiate certain efforts. Now people know the IG investigation being one of them, several in fact, and try to allow the system to work. And while engaging, elements within Congress and the legislative branch, elements within the executive branch who knew who I was, they were there when I was giving briefings, very senior people. I had to be very careful and very clever how I pursued this because they wanted the cat back in the bag. And so, fortunately, I had the help of people like Chris Mellon giving me advice, other individuals who I won't name right now, but will probably come out in public at some point, how to maneuver this. And it's been a long fight. It's been a long, and unfortunately, it's not over. There's still a lot more work needs to be done. I didn't do this to salvage or save my own personal credibility. I did it to salvage the conversation about transparency. And in order to do that, we had to get the facts correct. We had to get the Pentagon to come correct on their positions. And unfortunately, we had to expose a lot of the contradictions that were being made by that bureaucracy. And by the way, let me be clear. I don't want to hold the entire Pentagon or the entire Department of Defense responsible for that. There was only a few individuals, very, very powerful, very well placed individuals that really were trying to obfuscate this message, and those individuals have subsequently been called out. Again, there's a few more, I think, speed bumps that are going to have to be addressed and potentially removed. But we've come a long way, and as far as my own personal experience, I wouldn't have wished this on anybody. It's been extremely difficult on my family. Um, Tough for me because I had to see the pain that they went through because they know who I am and what I stand for, and to see the constant attacks and to see that the Pentagon was favoring certain media outlets to push their agenda and their information, and it was obvious. The problem it wasn't obvious to the public. For some folks it was, I think, and you're starting to see now articles coming out by individuals who have a really good understanding of what was going on. But those voices were the minority for a long time, and I think, yeah, I mean, there you have it. It's been a really tough journey for me personally and for my family.
just for context, I've tried to split this interview up to past, present, and future. So if there's anything people may be listening to thinking follow up on that, it may come later down the line depending on how it goes. I want to ask you, Lou, now. I want to try and make this fair. I get called out for being a fan of yours and whatever that may entail. And I've said, yeah, I put my eggs in the Lue Elizondo basket at the moment, and I was a fan of TTSA and what they set out to accomplish and what was accomplished. But I think it's fair to say that you are human and you've always said that. And along the lines, you will have made mistakes. What
Absolutely.
is the biggest mistake you've made or misstep you've taken since leaving ATIP? And what did you learn from
Wow.
it?
Andy, I think the biggest mistake I've made is one that I haven't been able to recognize yet. Because if I don't recognize a mistake, then I can't fix it and I can't address it. And I'm sure I've made a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I try to hold myself accountable and very quickly address it. If I say something that's contradictory, or I say something that later on turns out to be inaccurate because it's either my opinion or the way I read the information, I always try to hold myself accountable. I guess my biggest fear, or my greatest mistake, are those mistakes that I've made, and I haven't recognized. They haven't been brought to my attention yet. So I'm unaware of them, right? And I'm very careful because a lot of people hold on to every word that I say, and I've been very clear. I leave breadcrumbs, in some cases, loaves of bread along the way for people to follow. Um, but if I've made a mistake and it hasn't been brought to my attention, or I'm unaware of it, then that's truly the biggest mistake, because it can't be fixed, right? It can't be fixed until it's made brought to my attention. I'm made aware of it. So I guess it's the mistakes that I don't realize I've made yet.
In your last Jimmy Church interview, now we started arranging this during your media run announcement back in February. You said at that time you'd just come back from one of the most successful ever visits from DC. What makes a successful visit in this topic in
Yes.
DC? And I want to know as well. I'm a fan of the West Wing TV show, and I remember at one moment of an episode where they said at the start the previous administration had almost cured cancer, and they used that as a let's go cure cancer, let's go and do that big thing. Did you have any nearly moments in DC where we almost got a level of progress that we don't have yet, and for whatever reason it didn't happen?
Yeah. Wow. What an insightful question. Every trip to DC is successful. It depends who we're engaging. There's always new information to be discussed, and new developments, and new incidents, new data. But then there's also the conversation of where do we go from here, right? And when people are having a healthy debate on what are the next steps, that's fantastic, because that means people are thinking about the right things. As far as a almost moment, yeah, there's one in particular, but unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to discuss it yet. It occurred some time ago. Some colleagues were involved in it. There was a discussion by some very senior people in a former administration to potentially discuss disclosure. Um, and for whatever reasons, it was decided later on not, maybe it wasn't time. Um, I wasn't privy to that. I don't know all the details, and I certainly, it's preliminary right now for me to even comment on it. But there have been those moments where we've come very close to something, and for whatever reason, it was decided that maybe the timing wasn't right. Um, but again, I want to be very careful, because I'm hearing this third hand, so I don't want to say too much, because I wasn't there.
And can you talk about any realizations during or after moments during your time in ATIP? It's no secret with your clearance you would have been privy to some of those videos or pieces of footage, or the data some of us would love to see and we hear talked about. You must have sat back and just went, wow, and just had to take
Yeah,
a moment, whether it was in an office or in a car, or can you talk about any of those?
yeah. I mean, I always reference a 23-minute video. That's a very compelling video. That at some point, if it comes out, people are going to go, "Holy smokes!" But that's not just the only one. I mean, people. I've said this before, and let me if I can maybe reemphasize it. This is happening every week, guys. This is not, I mean, if you're focusing on the Nimitz, not you, but people are focusing just on the Nimitz or the Roosevelt, you're focusing on the wrong things because this is happening every week. Data's coming in from all over the world from U.S. collection assets. And again, I want to be careful to say what I say here, but this is happening every week. Um, and more people are coming out and reporting these incidents and capturing video and telemetry data and whatnot. So, um, it's hard to say, was there a moment? Because every moment, every time you think you've seen, the ultimate video, then more data, more information comes out. And there's another one, right? And then there's another one, and there's another one. There's a pilot coming and saying, look, I chased this thing for half an hour. I couldn't get close to it. I mean, so there's not just one compelling video. There's a lot of data out there that's continuing to come to fruition regarding the efforts and the policies that have recently been put in place for that information to be reported. There was a hope that increased reporting would occur, and again, like I said, that's coming to fruition. It's happening.
Over time, you mentioned pilots chasing these objects for up to half an hour or longer, and back in the Tic Tac event, that's been talked about ad nauseum. That they were there hovering for hours and 12 hours at a time, which we just don't have that technology. Has there been any data presented to yourself you can talk about that we've noticed that the technology of these UAP have improved over time? You've mentioned that going back to the 50s and 60s, we've seen these objects, but is there any notable difference now?
No, it seems to be the same technology being displayed. I mean, we have radar tracks and radar data, these things doing upwards of 13,000 miles an hour in low Earth atmosphere, where the friction coefficient of that is astounding. It's almost like it'd be like swimming through dirt. It's just the air is so thick, and when you're moving that fast, air density and air friction is problematic. That's the reason why. Case in point, the SR-71, Lockheed YF-12A SR-71, the Blackbird, it is an aircraft comprised entirely of titanium because it gets superheated, even though it's flying at many tens of thousands of feet in altitude and traveling at 3,200 miles an hour. Forgive me. Um, the friction is so high that on some of the colder parts of the engine, it's still like 800, 900 degrees. So, and that's at 3,200 miles an hour. Imagine, speeds several times faster. It's almost unimaginable, almost incomprehensible. And the SR-71 is very, very high when it's flying like that with that amount of heat. The lower you go in atmosphere, it just that friction coefficient just goes up and up and up. And we have historical data going back to the 50s where these things, 60s, where these things were tracked doing 8, 9, 10,000 miles an hour. So, I don't think we have seen if you will, a steady increase in their capabilities. The capabilities seem to be the same. What we do see is an increased prevalence of these things being seen. And we don't know if that's a function of simply technology. Everybody now has a cell phone. The world is more densely populated. It could be, or it could be that there really is an increased prevalence. We don't know yet. There's data to suggest both may be true.
And on that data, the line is now famous. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the SA. Can you tell us how often there were multiple UAPs reported compared to an individual craft? Was there a pattern recognized or any takeaway from that?
Well, they were flying in a V formation. Um, that we do know. And more of these things were tracked and actually seen with the naked eye. Um, they're it's interesting because some of the historical videos that have described a triangular vehicle, the problem is when you're looking at a blank sky and you see 3 points of light, there's no reference, there's no depth. And the question is, is there an object in the middle? Is there a solid object in the middle, or is it really three separate, you know, vehicles, so to speak, or points of light. And orientation also means a lot. And so it's difficult. We have seen cases where we thought we saw some material in between, if you will, a triangular craft, and it turned out later that it was actually three separate UAP. And then other cases, it turns out where we think we see three separate UAP, and it's actually part of a single vehicle. Um, and so, I think it's probably too early to tell right now. Is there a greater frequency of um, vehicles flying in formation, and are they do they accompany other UAPs? Certainly, that has happened. There's a lot of data that suggests sometimes they fly together. They even can. It looks like some of these things are actually kicked off almost like think of a drone or a UAV coming from a mothership, if you will. I hate to use that term, but from a larger
Yeah.
vehicle, a larger craft. Um, I think it's, I don't know if there's been any real analysis to make a determination that, most UAP incidents involve a fleet of them, right? As we heard, as you're talking about the famous video, look on the ASA, right? Um, I don't know. I do know that there's data on both singular craft and multiple vehicles being seen and interacting with each other to some degree. It goes back. It's interesting. There's some old historical reporting from from right before the beginning of the Renaissance, during the Middle Ages, in the 1600s actually. So in Nuremberg, the famous Nuremberg incident in Germany, where a lot of different shaped vehicles, lenticular craft and cylindrical craft and triangular craft, little orbs of light, seem to be interacting with each other, and some even described it that there was some sort of aerial dogfight between vehicles. Obviously, this is centuries before my time, so I certainly can't speak in an articulate manner regarding that incident. But there were a lot of eyewitnesses that discussed that, of these vehicles flying in formation, if you will.
You mentioned an increase in sightings. Is that down to us having more cell phones or Navy technologies, military technology improving month on month, maybe week on week? Are they noticing us noticing them more?
Well, they certainly are aware that we are now aware. Dave Fravor actually talks about as he goes to engage and cut the gap, and try to engage this Tic Tac. It orientated itself at him, pointed at him, and kept a safe distance from his aircraft, and kind of mirrored his maneuvers in order to keep a safe distance. And then, bang, as he starts to close the gap, it then demonstrates that it's not very happy with Dave Fravor, and so it disappears over the horizon. There does seem to be some sort of awareness there. It's not like we're walking in the desert and there's we don't notice the ants on the floor. It definitely seems that they are very well aware of our presence, and respond accordingly. Um, you know, People talk about communication, but when I take a treat and I tell my dog to sit and the dog sits, I'm training the dog, but at the same time, the dog has trained me. When the dog whines and wants to go outside, the dog has trained me to go open the door because he needs to go to the bathroom, right? So it's communication doesn't have to be verbal, and one can surmise that by us doing certain things and it responds accordingly, that's a form of communication. And we do see that there's a keen interest in our nuclear equities. Um, so, anyways, there you have it. I think I think there's definitely an awareness of our presence. That's pretty clear.
Dave Fravor's incident has been well documented, and Commander Fravor talked about it on several shows. Have you spoken to other pilots who have had incidents as spectacular as that
Absolutely,
close? And have they
absolutely.
described very similar behaviours or anything different?
Yeah, absolutely. Both similar and different. It's really an enigma. There's pilots who have tried to engage it. There's a pilot I spoke to in South America who ever had like 1,000 eyewitnesses. They were doing a formation on the air on the tarmac, and there was this UAP over the air base, and so they scrambled at the time one of the most premier fighter aircraft, Russian fighter aircraft, to engage this thing. And he fired his cannons at it, and it didn't do a damn thing. Um, there's other ones where these things will come in, right next to the aircraft, right off the wingtip, and just kind of almost like it's unbelievable, almost like fly as a wingman for a while, almost like play with the pilot, almost in a I hate to say playful way because we really don't know, but there doesn't seem to be any obvious signs of aggression. Almost kind of like, hey, let's go play and let me show you what I can do, right? So that's been reported as well.
It sounds like dolphins when they swim alongside boats
It
and they'll
does,
do
doesn't it?
flips and maneuvers and then just
Yeah,
go off and do their own thing.
yeah. They ride the bow wave, right? And they'll kind of demonstrate, look how maneuverable I am in the water, right? And I can flip and turn and spin, and here you are just plowing through the waves. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good analogy.
You mentioned, interestingly, going back to the past, different shapes of craft, lenticular and such. And excuse the slightly longer question here. Part of the recently declassified but heavily redacted UAP task force report contained a page on the shape of UAP. Tic Tacs seem to have replaced the classic saucer shape in terms of the go-to descriptor that you see online from people these days. However, to your knowledge, are the US military and others still encountering a range of shaped craft that are categorically not adversarial technologies?
Um, you're asking me two different questions, actually. You're asking me, are they still encountering different shapes craft? Yes, absolutely. It's not just Tic Tacs. But the second part of your question is, are they certainly not adversarial technology? What I can say is we think that they're not adversarial technology. You don't know what you don't know. It's highly unlikely that some of these are foreign technology, but as we continue to evolve technologically speaking, we're getting more and more advanced in our capabilities. And so at some point, we may find ourselves in a situation where some of these UAP could absolutely be replicated by a foreign government. I don't think we're there yet, and I think that the general consensus by the intelligence communities that we're not there yet. But at some point, the more we understand and learn about these things, the more we may have the ability to replicate some of their performance.
And your answer, would that be the reason, or one of the reasons, that that page is so heavily redacted? Is because if the US government show that we know there's this shape, and this shape, and it turns out those are actually Chinese drones, you don't want the Chinese to know that they have that object.
Precisely. You don't ever want to broadcast your vulnerabilities, and you also don't want to broadcast what you know about your enemy. Um, that's very important. That's part of counterintelligence. You don't want to reveal. It's like playing a game of chess. You don't want to tell your enemy what your next move is, and you don't want to tell your enemy what your own pieces are capable of. That's not a very smart way to play chess. Um, so you're absolutely correct. That's certainly one reason to keep things classified.
Any other reasons, if that's one of them, that you could go into?
Yeah, I mean, we could spend here all day talking about why we classify information. Usually,
Particularly, I suppose, the shape. Sorry, I should have gave you context there. The actual shape of the objects. Why would that be classified?
there's something called blue force and red force capabilities. Blue force are considered your own technologies. Red force are considered the technologies of your adversaries. We spend billions of dollars each year in research and development trying to keep a competitive advantage over our adversaries. We do have some very sophisticated technologies that I'm certainly not going to go into. And you want to protect those equities. Is it possible in the past that some people have confused UFOs with advanced secret U.S. technology? Well, sure, we know that. That happened with the B-2 bomber program. When people would report the black flying wing, and also the old wobbly Goblin, the the 117, the night fighter. People often look. We even see it right now in the commercial world, right? With Elon Musk and Starlink, people see these chains of satellites. I see them all the time out here in Wyoming, that this chain of
Mm.
satellites 50, 60 long in a string, almost like a string of pearls, and people report that as being UFOs, because if you've never seen it before, then certainly it's going to be something that's going to be novel, and pique your interest, and it may seem like an unidentified flying object when in reality it's just a new type of technology. The government wants to protect a lot of those key technologies, not Starlink necessarily, but other technologies that we employ and develop, because we spend a lot of money on it, right? And we don't want an adversary coming in and stealing it, and then having that same advantage on the battle space. So there's all sorts of reasons. Again, I mean, we could spend here probably the next 3 hours if you really wanted to and talk about it. But there's good reason why even the shapes of vehicles may wind up being redacted, because a shape can tell you a lot. Let's look at this little aircraft here for a moment, right? If I were to show you this and compare this to, let's say, the model of a biplane, right? Well, just by looking at the shape of this probably tells you a whole lot, right? You have a delta wing configuration, small control surfaces, so you can assume this is probably going to fly very, very fast. When you look at the intakes are on top of the aircraft, on top of the airframe, not below. So that probably tells you that this is a vehicle that is designed to have a low signature. You can tell a lot by a simple shape. And this is just a little toy, right? So yeah, there's reasons why you want to keep certain things classified, and shapes can tell you a lot. They can tell you physical characteristics and even performance capabilities, and potentially even something manned or unmanned. So yeah, there you have it.
And last year, Lou, on some interviews, you mentioned China was potentially going to attempt to raise the UAP issue within the UN. Is that something that is still progressing that you can speak about?
Well, they did. They did. It was called the Five Continents Initiative, and they were behind that, and it did not go, I think, as planned. I think people became very wise very quickly as to you don't want one nation controlling the narrative, and that includes the United States. This is something that impacts everyone. I think everybody should have an equal say in this topic, from a governmental perspective, and this is why we've tried to what I've said before, democratize the conversation. The problem for the last 70 years is that we haven't democratized the conversation. It's been held in small enclaves of organizations and institutions, and governments, and that hasn't been very helpful towards transparency. So we are trying to democratize the conversation, and I think the United Nations is certainly someplace that would be very good to have this conversation on an international level. Furthermore, there's efforts we see with Italy right now, and the small Republic of San Marino, by the way, the longest standing republic in the entire world since the 1300s. I had the honor and privilege of going there and speaking to some members of the government of San Marino. And maybe having a small enclave like that would be great to have an annual UN meeting on this topic. There was an initiative called the Titan. Titan is the name of the mountain there in San Marino, and Titan was chosen as a name to perhaps try and get the rest of the world on board with having a summit, if you will, an international summit on the UAP topic, hosted there by San Marino. San Marino is a neutral country. They have it even during the World War II. It's a bit of a Switzerland, and there seems to be some interest, and I for one think it's a great idea. So I think international involvement is critical. I don't think that China should be leading the effort, just like I don't think U.S. should be leading the effort. I'm not trying to offend anybody who is from China. What I'm simply saying is that no one country should own the narrative or control the narrative.
Lou, I'm going to move on to discuss the present. So we've covered the past there quite well, I think, and appreciate the answers. Of course, I'm going to discuss Garry Reid. However, I would point people to Ryan Robbins. If you search UFO Jesus on YouTube, done a 37-minute interview which dropped on the 22nd of April, which covers that situation in quite a lot of detail and covers it quite well, Lou. And I'll put the links for that in the description. However, I do want to know, you stated on that interview that Garry Reid made progress on the UAP topic difficult. Is the road now clearer for others who are on the side of progress within the government to come forward? or is this a Hydra type situation where you cut off one head and two more will take its place?
No, I think it certainly made it easier. The problem is that in the government, there's still elements that don't appreciate the topic. They consider this issue of UAP as an issue of air clutter and space trash, space junk. And, with the hopes of, well, if we can identify more air clutter and space junk, then we can, put this to bed, and UFOs are not real. That's not the case. UFOs represent breakaway technology. UFOs, UAP, it represents breakaway technology. It's not a matter of air trash. Yes, we have air trash out there, and we have clutter, and there's laws that require U.S. air domain awareness, but those laws have been around forever. I mean, they've been around for a long, long time, especially after 9/11. There was really an increased emphasis on trying to figure out what's in our airspace. But don't make the mistake of lumping UAP, which represents something completely different, as an air clutter issue or an air trash issue. That's a mistake. And so, trying to have that discussion with bureaucrats who they just don't get it, right? And they want this monkey off their back, and they want to answer Congress and scratch that itch so they can move on to do other things. That's not going to happen. And I don't know how to tell people politely who are still in these positions of power and influence, but that's a mistake, and you're not meeting the intent of Congress if you think that you're going to wrap this up as air clutter issue, or space junk. Then you probably need to start looking for another job at some point, because that's not the intent of Congress, and it's not the intent of the American people, certainly. And so, that's that's one of the concerns I have right now, and making sure that people remain informed and educated about this topic. It's complex, and people want to know, and the UFO hobbyist out there, doesn't really necessarily appreciate all the nuances, what's going on right now. I mean, this is we're still in a fight, we're still in a battle. We won a significant battle, but the war is not over, regarding transparency in this topic. It's hard fought every single day. We are engaged in trying to get this topic elevated where it needs to be elevated, and having the intent of Congress met, because ultimately the intent of Congress is the intent of the American people. They work for their constituents. Their constituents have spoken. We want this addressed. So anybody who is in the executive branch who thinks that, addressing this as just, air clutter and air trash, you're not meeting the will and the intent of the American people ultimately. And that's a problem, because your job is to serve the American people. And so that's why I say, look, I'm trying to be polite, but you don't want to make that mistake. Please look at what's just happened. If you are not serving the intent of the American people, then chances are you're not going to last very long in the government, because people are now wise to this topic, and they're not going to let you get away with just obfuscation. That's not going to occur. Certainly not while people like me and Chris Mellon are alive. That's we have no problem. There's a vernacular calling it, I guess, in cards, calling the spade a spade, right? In cards, we have no problem doing that. It's I have no problem addressing, um, malfeasance. I have no problem addressing, uh, ineptitude and corruptness. I'm not at all opposed to, calling people out on that on national TV, and the media, because ultimately we have to hold these people accountable. Their job is to in essence, um, represent the will of the people, and to execute the will of the people. And, if they don't do that, then, again, probably better off finding another job.
Many of those people you talk about who have an interest in this subject are eagerly awaiting the next video to hopefully be declassified or leaked or dropped. Someone to show us the famous photographs that, the black triangles, whatever they may be, whether they really exist or not. Something that is coming is your book. And is that finished yet?
I am working very diligently on it. I'm definitely progressing quite well with it. I want to be very careful, always manage expectations. I'd rather under promise and over deliver if I have my choice. But I know that it is coming along quite well. I'm working on it, very diligently, and I think it's going to be very informative when it comes out.
Is it a book that you want to write, or is it a book that you need to write?
It's a book I need to write. No, it's a lot of work. I don't want to write the book. It needs to be written because people need to know the truth. Because once you write that book and it's in writing, it can never be taken away. And that is, think of a slide rule, right? You know, I want to make a point using this book where we can never go backwards in time. You'll never be able, you might slow progress if you are, in charge of this effort, but you'll never be able to put it back, the genie back in the bottle, because the book will be definitive and it's going to say, this is what happened and this is what's happening and these are the facts. And then at that point, people can use that as hopefully a new starting point for this conversation.
What's been the hardest part of writing the book?
Wow. You can only put so much in a book. You can only put, 300 so pages. I mean, I could put 1,000 pages, 2,000 pages in this. So it's the hardest part is probably figuring out what you have to leave out, what you have to cut out. Just because there's so much information that's available. This is still, I mean, this is still, the book's writing itself right now. I mean, it's still evolving, right? Because every day there's new information and new things that are happening that have to be in the book. And I guess the biggest concern is I have the book and all of a sudden it comes out, but during that time it's being published, there's more information that really should be in the book. And so it's kind of a it's a bit of a frustration because it's this topic is evolving so quickly now that it's almost impossible to make the determination. Okay, what do I put this in and leave this out, or do I put that in and leave this out? Right, and it's but I think it's going to be very helpful for the discussion.
The things that you do leave out are what people like me will ask you when you come to talk about the
Yeah,
book on
great.
shows in the future. One of those shows that people ask about is Joe Rogan. Now, Chris Mellon has been on Joe Rogan, Dave Fravor has been on Joe Rogan, George Knapp. You, as of yet, are still conspicuous by your absence. Has that been something that has been planned and never happened, or is it something that's in the future for you?
I don't think about it. I'm not a Hollywood guy. I'm not somebody that seeks attention or wants to be seen. Every time I'm on mainstream media because they ask me to be on it, I don't go out and say, "Hey, put me on TV." I'm not that guy. I really, frankly, don't give a damn if I'm on someone's podcast or not. To me, it's not a, I know exactly who I am. I don't need that validation or vindication to be on any TV. Uh, I've always been Lue Elizondo and I always will be Lue Elizondo. I don't think about it. To my knowledge, Joe Rogan hasn't asked me, and frankly, I haven't reached out to him and asked him. I figure if he wants me on a show, he'll ask me, and I'll consider it. But I don't need to be on anybody's show. For example, I'm doing this with you. I'm doing this because you asked me. I didn't come out to ask you, can I be on your podcast? And I don't give a damn if you have one follower or 1 billion followers. If you ask me to be on your program and you're a decent guy, I'm happy to do it. If you're a decent person. So, yeah, I mean that's short and simple. He hasn't asked me, and frankly, I haven't I haven't really asked him either.
The benefit for people like myself is I get so many listeners tell me that they found me because they saw you or Dave Fravor or another or any of those people who speak on UFOs on, Joe Rogan's podcast, or Kurt Mungo, Theory of Everything, or Brian Keating had Tom DeLonge on his podcast, and they find smaller podcasts like mine and they start to explore the subject a lot more. So for a podcast like Joe Rogan, there's going to be millions of people who, of course, they know about UFOs, but there's no real interest there. And someone like you and potentially the book could be a huge spark for that mainstream push. And that can only help the conversation in terms of the American people for a start, getting this conversation going through local constituencies, from their elected officials and further up the chain, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. But like I said, I don't control, Mr. Rogan's schedule. And I don't particularly, you know, I I think it's pretty obvious I'm pulling away from social media. It's become a bit of a distraction. Um, Unfortunately, my presence, the conversation has shifted more about me and less about transparency and UFOs. Every day people are fighting over literally the choice of one word that people use, and it's silly,
Yeah.
and it's just it takes away because people who really want to learn about this topic for the first time, the first thing they do is they jump on social media, maybe UFO Twitter, and it's just a cesspool of bickering and infighting over stupid stuff, and unfortunately, it inadvertently, I may be part of the cause of that because people focus on me rather than the message. They focus on the messenger and not the message. And it's problematic, and that's why there is probably a very obvious absence of my presence on social media. I'm really trying to do disclosure a favor because I see that people are beginning to act like children, and they get very, very petty, and they start attacking each other. And I don't have the time for it. And the topic's too important, really, to get yourself involved in that, tempest in a teapot. The topic deserves much more respect than that. And so, Joe Rogan, if he were again going back to the question, would I do it? I don't know. I'd have to see, his content. I don't listen to Joe Rogan. If it is a way to have the conversation and have a fair conversation and people are interested in the topic, then yeah, I'd probably do it. But if it's to go there and, do something like like the old Jerry Springer show and just, sensationalism and salaciousness, I'm not interested in doing that.
I'll just add to the social media side of things. I understand that. I think the other day I saw someone comment, Lou, you'd shared an anecdote, which no doubt you've shared similar anecdotes many times. And within the anecdote, the name of a football team, I think it was changed. And that's what someone argued about and picked up on, that you were clearly lying because the name of the team had changed. And it was like, that's not the point of the sentence to be focusing on.
Yeah.
But it's one of those that people won't know what they've got until it's gone, which generally happens. And
Yeah.
not only yourself, but other social media
Yeah,
folks
no,
and
it's
voices,
it's
and
it's
it's
it's a
disappointing.
silly, right? Because you say Miami Dolphins versus Miami Hurricanes, it's so dumb, and it's a distraction from the real conversation, and people don't understand. They just don't get it. They also will point out, well, Lou said this, but FOIA didn't, prove that. There's no FOIA documentation on it. Well, FOIA isn't king. You might have a king of FOIA, but FOIA isn't king. There's a lot that happens that's done verbally. This entire podcast, you can't FOIA it. We're having a conversation where a lot of information is exchanged, and that's true inside the government. And just people decide to focus on these things, and I think it's a distraction. We're not doing the cause any favors, and people who come in fresh, they see this, and it's just a mosh pit of egos and beliefs and petty little money making enterprises and that will want to control the narrative. I mean, it's just silly. And so let's elevate this conversation to where it belongs, where it deserves. Let's put it on the pedestal and just take it out of the muddy ditch that it keeps finding itself in. And so that's my perspective, anyways.
No, that's fair. And amongst those dissenting voices and the drama and the infighting, there's a lot of great people, and it's nice to speak to those. And I can see your point. I think within to move on the conversation with us here, Lou, some of the down period or quiet period causes folk to need to make that drama. And in the build up to the UAP task force report, we had an excitement and a building of momentum. The mainstream media coverage was picking up. That was led from the front by people like yourself, Sean Cahill, Chris Mellon, and others appearing on shows around the world. That certainly peaked as 2021 drew to a close as the report came and things were implemented in the background and then went quiet. When do you see that potential next wave beginning to happen again, or is it underway?
It's underway. Look, the problem is that we as a society have become so hooked on instant gratification and that as Sean likes to say, that dopamine hit, right? that we are now at the point where we can do within a punch of a button. I can shop online. I can get something delivered to my house. I can get food delivered to my house. I can, it's as some of the advertisements for fast food companies, have it your way and have it now, right? We've become so accustomed to that and information is really at the tip of our hands. Anything we want to do is jump online and I can get answers that I need. I can pull a YouTube video on how to do something instantly. And the problem is this topic is not there's no instant solution. There's no instant answer. And so people get impatient with that. And with that impatience, they get frustrated. With that frustration, they get angry. And this is why I've told people before, and I know they don't like the advice. Look, if you find yourself frustrated and angry, maybe tune out for 5 years and check back in 5 years and see where we are in the conversation, because this isn't instant gratification. This isn't, I'm not gonna, and I'm not gonna tell you what to think about it, right? You turn to most media outlets today, not only are they gonna tell you the news, but they're gonna tell you what you should think about it, because it's mostly a big editorial, really. Most media outlets are that way. Not all, but a lot of them are. And so that's problematic, because we become so lazy as a society. Not only do we want to know what's going on, but we also want to be told what to think about it because we're too lazy to even think for ourselves half the time. And that's a shame. And this topic is so important, and it's so revolutionary for our species that it deserves time and patience. It deserves respect. It deserves to have really really smart people from around the world in academia and science and technology to look at this problem. And it's not going to be solved overnight. It's just not. And I know that's hard for a lot of people, because they're like, well, we've already known for the last 70 years. Well, okay, we've known some, but we don't have the answers yet. And in that void, don't be tempted to start speculating and creating your own narrative that, well, this must be the case, and therefore we've had a treaty alliance with the Pleiadians, and we're fighting the reptilians and all that nonsense. It's not helpful to the cause. People have a tendency to fill those gaps, information gaps, with speculation. And although it's okay to speculate, we have to be cognizant of the fact that speculation is just speculation. It's not fact, and we confuse our beliefs a lot of times with what we think and with what we know, and they're not necessarily the same.
Lou, moving on to the future, I've got a couple of questions here. You've just mentioned that the come back in 5 years comment. You've made that before. What could the landscape of this conversation look like realistically, with the progress being made now and looking at that potential growth or accelerated progress? What could it look like?
Wow. Well, let me answer that by saying I am extremely hopeful for this next generation. Um, it is this next generation that is going to inherit this topic, and hopefully not make the same mistakes my generation made regarding this topic. I think most of the answers are going to be within the next 20 years. That a lot of the answers we're looking for, we may have answered in the next 20 years, and I think it's going to be up to this next generation to solve some of these big questions. I think we can hopefully, first of all, know what our government has known for the last 70 years about this topic, first and foremost. Before we can move forward, we first need to get a handle on what we already know. And that's going to be a very difficult task, because there's a lot of interest and equities at stake. There's a lot of baggage, and that baggage needs to be sorted out and addressed. Um, so my hope is that in the next 20 years, we will have, I guess in the future, right, that we know more about the past. We can have a definitive understanding of who was involved in what projects and what insight was gained as a result of those efforts. If we can achieve that in the next 20 years, then I think the following 20 years after that, we can start maybe getting answers to some of the big questions, right? That everybody wants to know. Where are they from? What are the intent? What's the intent? How does it work? Um, that's just me personally speaking. I could be wrong, but that's my perspective.
I'm going to ask you a question just because you mentioned there who could they be, where could they be from, etc. And Dan might laugh at this because I called him when I thought about this on the bus home from work the other day, and I very badly elaborated to him what I wanted to ask. If we as a species, Lou, discovered the technology to travel in different dimensions, space or time, we land upon a craft and we can zip into, say, a different dimension, like you've talked about before. There's potentially a shadow biome, or maybe they're here but not here directly. How would we as a species, do you think, use that technology? Would we behave in a similar way to how these others may be behaving?
You know, Mother Nature, she's really clever. She's had a long time to figure out biology. And there may be a reason why we don't have the answers yet that we're seeking. Maybe we're just simply as a species not ready for it, right? Perhaps we're not ready for nuclear technology. Look of the angst that it's causing right now in the Ukraine. And now you have, uh, uh, two countries that are fighting each other, potentially putting the entire world at the brink of war, right? And annihilating all living species on this planet. Um, are we really ready for that technology as a species? I don't know. Are we giving a loaded handgun to a child if we were to have this type of technology? I think some people are probably ready for it and could be trusted with it, but there's a whole lot of people that I don't think can be. We have rogue nations out there all the time. And look, I'm a patriot to my country, but I'm gonna tell you, there's only been one country so far in the last century that's ever used an atomic technology against other human beings, and that was my country in World War II. Now, arguably, it may have saved many more lives, but the moment we discovered that technology, we use it against our fellow man. And that's problematic because that's human nature. That's not just an American thing. It's not just a Russian or a Chinese thing. That's human nature. You give one monkey a stone and you give another monkey a club. Well, guess what? They're going to use it against each other because that's what we do. Species tend to be violent, unfortunately, because as part of our evolution for survival and the competition for resources. It's innate. It's part of our DNA. Plants even do it. They compete for resources. Humans do it. Every animal on this planet. It's almost an unwritten rule of survival, right? So, are we prepared for some sort of technology that now we can export our tendencies, perhaps across the cosmos? Would that even be wise, knowing how we behave with each other? Are we really prepared to be part of any, if there is some sort of cosmic community, so to speak? Are we really even prepared to interact with that? Um, you know, I'm not so sure that we are. But I do also think that the truth is important. I think we must tell the truth. I think our species is prepared for the reality that we're not alone. Now, I'm not saying we're necessarily prepared to go out there and engage, but the mere fact that we're not alone is, I think, it's that's not a fact that should be classified or kept secret from citizens of the world. I also think it might help us, maybe, just maybe, treat each other a little better if we know that there's something bigger out there, something that is now touchable, if you will. Um, can we learn from that? Can we learn the fact that, hey, we don't have to destroy ourselves to evolve. We don't have to beat each other up with a club or a stone. We can work together and maybe use a club and the stone as a tool and to the benefit of the of you know of the species. Um, that's my
Let me
two
ask,
cents.
just to follow that on slightly, and hopefully I word this appropriately. Say a group of responsible individuals, I'm going to say yourself and Christopher Mellon, are given this technology, okay? Would you behave the same way observing another intelligent species on their planet? Would you stay at a great height? Would you observe their navy from a distance? You know,
Yeah.
do you appreciate how these objects appear to behave, and do you think we would do exactly the same?
Well, we do now, don't we? when we fly over the Serengeti in Africa with a helicopter, looking at the migratory patterns of wildebeest, right? We stay a safe distance. We fly over the herd, probably scare the hell out of them when we're flying. Sometimes we may decide to dart one and pull some blood samples to see, the health of the herd and whatnot, the reproductive health. And then, we fly away. And of course, the wildebeest wakes up, a couple hours later with, a sore butt. And like, what the hell was that? You know? Um, we do that now. We do it in the deep oceans. That's kind of what science does, isn't it? We observe. Science is the art of observation and understanding. And in order to understand, you have to observe. And I think that's precisely probably what we would do anyways, whether it's me or Chris or not. I think we would do that as a species. We would continue doing what we do now with our own with even our own species, right? So.
You mentioned that 20 years' time, future generations may benefit from the questions and the progress that are happening now. One of the tools that we'll have in just a few months is the James Webb Telescope, which will be up and running at full functionality. How important a role in our understanding of who we are and are we alone do you think this will or could play?
Yeah, I mean it's just another tool in the tool bag, isn't it? Right? I mean, you don't build a house with just a hammer or just a screwdriver. You have to have a tool bag to build a house. And that's precisely what the James Webb Telescope is and the Galileo project with what they're doing and other efforts. These are just another tool that you need ultimately to build the house. Some tools are used more than others. Um, but at the end of the day, you really want a complete tool bag if you want to do a good job and build a strong house. Um, the problem with telescopes, deep field telescopes, is that it's a lot like looking at the sky through a straw. Um, you can see very, very far, but it's only a very, very small portion of the sky. And you also have focal issues. Something. People know that I'm a bit of a gun guy, right? I have firearms, and when you're looking through a scope, one thing is interesting because when you're looking at an object way, way, way far away, you can have something pass right by in front of you, but because the optics are the way they are, you're not going to pick it up. Because the focus is on a very distant object, and that's what's in focus. Anything in front of that field becomes increasingly more and more blurry till eventually something can pass right in front of it, and you won't even see it because the focus is so far downrange. That's the problem with a lot of telescopes in general. Unless you're focusing on something, um, there's a really good possibility you're not going to see it. First of all, you have to be looking at the right part of the sky, and then you have to be looking at the right depth, right? And sky is, as we know, is infinite, right? So how do you know where to where to focus if you want to see something? So those are some of the challenges with modern technology. It's really, really good if you have a static object you're looking at. But if you have an object that's moving, it becomes more complicated. If you don't know where it's going to be in the sky, when, whatnot. So,
You mentioned the Galileo project, of which you are on board, along with many, many other scientists, academics, and people from a whole range of backgrounds. In what direction is the project going, and is it one that you've got a long-term future with?
I have to give credit where credit is due. Um, you have someone like Avi Loeb who has decided to purposely buck the system. That's a big deal. You know what? I'm going to share something with you guys. And I may have shared this with a few folks already. I'm going to share a something that I picked up, and you guys can tell me what you think. Um, give me one moment here.
No
Okay,
problem.
so I'm going to pull this up. Okay, so I'm going to show this to your folks. It is a Peanuts cartoon. Okay, and let me read if I can real quick. "Quote unquote, trust the science is the most anti-science statement ever. Questioning science is how you do science." And I agree with that. Um, we have to challenge the status quo. That's the only reason why we now realize the Earth is not the center of the solar system, aptly named from Galileo, because Galileo decided to buck the system and say, look, your current understanding of the universe is flawed, right? And of course, everybody, I mean, he almost paid with his life, for even saying that. Turned out he was right. Let's not forget that every principle in science that we now take for granted as a law started off as someone's wacky, zany idea, a proposal. And I think Galileo, the project that Avi Loeb has pioneered, is part of that spirit. Let's not take for granted the things that we think as facts. There's a lot we still have yet to learn, and I think the way he is approaching this, particularly using some technology and telescopes, wide field telescopes, is a great start. Because look, he only has to be right one time, and he's probably going to get the Nobel Prize for it if he's right. So that's a big deal, and you have to be able to take risks. That's what the pursuit of real science is all about. It's about risks. It's about asking the hard questions, and sometimes the answer may not be necessarily very convenient, but it turns out to be the truth. So that would be my my 2 cents regarding Avi Loeb and the Galileo project. I wish we had more scientists like Avi, to be honest with you.
We interviewed Avi Loeb just 2 weeks ago, so if people haven't heard that, go back and check it out. But yeah, I'm sure if Galileo had social media back in his day, the abuse he would have gotten would have driven him off social media as well. So
Oh,
I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I guess to some degree he's probably pretty lucky there wasn't Twitter back then.
Yeah. Garry Nolan, Professor Garry Nolan, like I say, is coming on the podcast in a few weeks. I'm honoured with that. He doesn't do too many interviews. He's a very, very busy man. He mentioned on Cut Dry Mungo Theories of Everything, which happened, that came out just last week. We need an organisation we can turn to who can vet the data. I'm involved with Lue Elizondo and others trying to set that up. Is that something you can elaborate on and speak on that organisation?
I mean, you said it yourself. Gary's an incredible human being. I mean, really, really impressive. It's funny because I went to school to be for microbiology, immunology, and parasitology, and got my minors in the science and mathematics fields. And then you meet someone like Gary, who's actually been nominated for the Nobel Prize in immunology. Um, it's pretty incredible. Having him on board is a blessing. He has been very helpful in the past in this effort and this endeavor. He's precisely the type of skill set that we need. And yes, I am working with Garry Nolan and others, by the way, to create advisory boards, academic advisory boards, if you will, or think tanks and scientific think tanks that can, do a lot of the heavy lifting, right? Have the conversation in a way that is meaningful, that's informative, and helps shed some light on this topic. And all I can say is I'm blessed that Gary's part of the team. We have other very, very smart people as well that are part of the team. They haven't given me permission to share their names, so I won't yet. But I think people will be really impressed when they finally see these endeavors finalized and come to fruition. People will be surprised to see the type of caliber of individuals that are on these boards. Look, I'll be the first one to say I have deliberately taken myself out of other than setting it up any role of being on these boards because I don't have the qualifications, and I know that. I'm not. I don't have a PhD in the areas that are necessary. I'm not, and I don't claim to. We need the right people for these jobs, and I also know my limitations. I know that I'm not the right person for those jobs. I'm not doing it out of pride and ego. Sure, I probably could shoehorn myself into one of those positions, but for what? It would just be a distraction because I don't have the requisite skill sets for these positions. I am smart enough to know that we have a need for them, but I'm not smart enough to actually do it, to actually be in that role. And so Gary is one of the few people who actually is smart enough to be in one of those roles, and we're working very hard to formalize some of these endeavors.
Is there any timescale as to when the public, people like myself, are going to find out about these endeavours in a more formal way?
Yeah, Yeah, hopefully soon. I mean, there's some hurdles still, and some things that we have to do. Anytime you set up something like this, there's legal hurdles, and you've got corporate hurdles, and you've got funding hurdles, and you've got secretariat hurdles and administrative hurdles. I mean, this isn't just snap your fingers and it happens. People tend to think that, oh, this is fun work. It's not. It's exhausting. It's real work, man. It's real. A lot of effort has to go into this, and a lot of brain power to set this up right. Because if you set it up wrong, then 4 or 5 years down the road, you're really going to find yourself suffering the consequences. So it's better to do a little bit extra footwork and homework up front to make these organizations, to set them up correctly, and allow them to be enduring, and to not just be a layer of bureaucracy, right? We don't need another layer of bureaucracy. What we need are results. We need findings. And so that's what these organizations are being set up to do. Look, I've said this shouldn't be a secret to anybody, because I gave a briefing, and I even shared those briefing slides when I went to Italy, and then reshared them on a podcast. I mean, I've been saying this was going to happen for the last 6, 7 months. I actually have a diagram where I showed, what a national lab might look like, and all these little branches coming out. Um, I kind of hinted at this for some time.
Just before we get to listener questions to finish off, Lou, because I've got so many and I want to at least ask a few of them. I
Sure.
want to ask you one more question from myself. The day you get to ride off into your sunset, satisfied your work is finally done, what do you hope to have accomplished?
Gosh, people have already told me I'm there. I could do it tomorrow. Could do it today. I mean, mission accomplished. We got the topic elevated to the point now where it's been acknowledged by former directors of CIA and former presidents, and current sitting members of Congress, and we actually have a law. I mean, in theory, I could walk away now. The problem is, I'm concerned that we're still not where we need to be, and this topic doesn't backslide, because if it's not actively engaged, then we fall victim to the potential that this could be in 5 years relegated to, well, we did our due diligence, nothing to see here, folks, right? I don't want another blue book. That's not the intent of this. We put too much effort into this just to have this die on the vine, because it lost momentum. So, what it looks like for me is when we know everything we've done in the past, the American people are satisfied with that. They've had some of their questions answered, and we have a deliberate plan to move forward on this topic in a way that is enduring and informative and insightful and responsible, right? And I think we need to have the conversation truly at the international level, have some international bodies involved. And at that point, I feel that I've done all I can do. Um, I think I can still do more to help. Um, Hopefully, anyways. Do I want to? No, I don't. I'm exhausted, tired. But do I feel the need to? Yeah, I do. I do. My mission isn't complete yet. It's not. I wish it was. Like I said, it's been a long, long road so far for me and for my family. But it's too important of a mission. We're running a long marathon here. It's a relay race, and I'm waiting for someone to pick up the baton that won't drop it, right? Or get lazy and get tired, and say, yeah, I don't feel like running anymore. No, you have to. Whoever picks up this baton, you got to run till someone else takes it from your hand. You're stuck with it. Once it's kind of like the old, what is it? The old Pottery Barn saying, when you go to Pottery Barn, if you break it, you bought it. So once that
Yeah.
baton is in your hand, you own it, man. You got to carry it, and you got to carry it to the end. And who knows how long that is? You got to carry it till someone takes it from you, right? It's just like in the army. How long do you guard your post? Well, as long as you're told to, until someone else comes up and relieves you of that responsibility. That's your post. You stay and you guard it until that relief comes. And if relief never comes, then you stay there forever.
Lou, I'm going to go right into the deep end with listener questions, and thank you to everyone who sent over. I'm not exaggerating when I say there was about 300 to 400 questions submitted to Lou, of which I did read every one of them, and hopefully in some way your question's been answered in the body of the interview, or it'll get answered in future in some way, shape or form. First up, Jason in Los Angeles. Lou, if you remember last time you were on the podcast with me, you very candidly shared details of your mother's passing. Jason wants to know, do you believe the inevitable process of human death is in any way connected to the phenomenon?
Ooh, I have no idea. Like I said, we live in a wondrous and huge universe. I guess anything's possible, really. Um, death. I've been around death enough, probably too much, where what I've learned is that death is a process. Death is a transition. Death is not an event. It is a transition, just like birth is a transition, coming into one reality and then crossing over that threshold into something else, an unknown, but still something else. Um, I don't know the relationship, if any, regarding UAP. I guess it's anybody's guess. Could be. Um, but then we get into potentially the discussion of, some theological principles such as angels and demons and things like that. I don't think we know enough yet. I mean, certainly some people in the Pentagon, when I was in the Pentagon, was afraid of the topic because of that very issue, that connection. Um, I just don't know, think we have enough data right now to substantiate that. I wouldn't be surprised either way if it does or doesn't. Um, you know, but I think we have a long way to go before we can really definitively answer that question, because death is such an unknown and UAPs are such an unknown, right? That are the two connected? Well, the one way they are connected is that we really don't know very much about either one. So that's for certain. But is there a more intimate connection between the two? I have no idea.
The next question from Jack Burton. Jack asks, Lou, during or since your time with AATIP, are you aware of any loss of human life directly related to UAP?
Wow, I got to be really careful with that. I'm going to have to pass on that question respectfully. There's no way I can answer that question without. Yeah, I can't get into that question right now. I'm sorry.
Let me follow up with another listener question, Lou, but it's along similar lines, but potentially less of a direct human impact. Mr. Calhoun asks, can Lou elaborate whether different parts of aircraft during close encounters with UAPs were subject to varying degrees of damage?
Ooh, wow. Um, Let me answer this. There's information to suggest that avionics can be interfered with. We've seen it with rotary wing helicopters, and we've seen it with fixed wing aircraft, where there seemed to be some sort of interference. We don't know if it's deliberate or not, but there some cases aircraft have lost power. In other cases, aircraft have seem to physically have stopped, believe it or not, in midair. Um, so, put simply, Mr. Calhoun, great question. Yes.
John wants to know, is there any understanding of the best conditions for these craft to fly around or function? And for me to add on to that, Lou, I've always been very interested that as fast as these objects can go through the air, they still seem to slow down considerably underwater, even though they go faster, much faster than anything we have.
Yeah. Well, actually, underwater it's funny you say that, because we're using radar a lot of times to see things in the air, and radar is an electromagnetic energy wave that is traveling at roughly the speed of light, right? The problem is underwater, you have to use acoustics. Radar really doesn't work. You have to use sonar. And sonar is limited by the speed of sound underwater, which is fast, but it's not that fast. And so it could very well be the reason why we see these things moving slower underwater is not because they're actually moving slower, because those are the only ones when they're moving that slow we see, in essence, see with sonar, or hear, if you will, really is more accurate. If a vehicle is moving fast enough, sonar won't catch up to it. So in essence, you're not going to see, you're not going to hear those. You're not going to be able to detect those because the way sonar works, you have a ping, and that ping sends out an acoustic signature out into the water. It hits something, reflects back, and comes back. Very much like a bat uses sonar, and whales and dolphins. But there's limitations because, again, sound can only travel so fast underwater. There was a really interesting experiment done back in the 60s. And forgive me if I don't have all the details correct. So it's been a long time since I heard about this, but they were dropping depth charges in the 60s off the coast of, they're in the Caribbean, if I'm not mistaken. And they were trying to see how far sound waves would travel underwater. And there were these, these subaquatic channels, if you will, like canyons underwater. Sound waves would travel, long, very long distance. And I think it was like within 12 hours, they picked up one of these acoustic signatures off the coast of Australia or something like that. Again, please don't hold me to it. I don't know, but it was some remarkable distance, halfway around the world. They picked up these signatures, but that's still not, 13,000 miles an hour, 10,000 miles an hour. My point being is that there's limitations to sonar underwater. So we don't know if these things really do go slower underwater, or if that's just the limitations of our own technology, and that's why we're not picking up anything beyond maybe 800-900 knots underwater.
Interesting. Fred asks that in a recent interview on Martin Willis' podcast UFO, you were asked about the aerial school incident, and you responded there was some unknown and compelling information about the event. Can you elaborate?
I cannot right now. Someone else is gonna provide that. I've been asked respectfully not to discuss it. That information will be forthcoming in a very public way from people, for the consumers. So out of respect for some friends and colleagues, I'm not going to elaborate on it. The good news is that you're going to probably get a full a full earful of it at some point. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I know there's one or two productions in the pipeline to come out, so hopefully if it's one of those, that would be great that we're going to get to see that. So thanks.
I suspect it is.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Josh asks, did AATIP specifically ever prepare any formal reports for the DoD or DIA?
Yeah, absolutely, we did a lot. Yeah, I mean, there's reports there. I can't force DIA or DoD to release them, but those reports are there, and you know, with enough scratching, I'm sure the IG is aware of it. I wouldn't be surprised if they have copies of some of those reports, but yeah, absolutely, there were.
I think what Josh is getting at as well is the idea that are there documents still to be FOIA'd, and that doesn't have to be by one individual who seems to FOIA everything himself, that other people could be requesting that haven't seen the light of day?
Yeah, there's a lot, but you can FOIA them, doesn't mean they're going to be released. I mean, there's a tranche of information and data that is not being released. People are like, oh well, they don't have it. We FOIA, they said nothing to see here. Well, that's not entirely accurate. There's a lot there. That's why I keep saying, look, FOIA is good, but it has its limitations. There is a lot of information available that is not going to be found with FOIA. I'll just say that.
And is the issue with FOIA in that sense, Lou, that there's an incompetence, or is it more of a sinister aspect to it that certain things are deliberately held back?
Probably both. I'll be the first one to tell you that a lot of the documentations that we wrote for AATIP were FOIA exempt deliberately. Um, some of it is incompetence or ineptitude because you're relying on people to go through their files and their historic stuff and say, do you have anything related to this? And you're asking them to drop what they're doing and stop their work that they're doing, that they're getting paid for, to go through, their hard drive. And by the way, people get hundreds of FOIA requests a year. So, a lot of times you're like, yeah, I don't remember anything like that. No, unresponsive. And you respond back, I don't have anything. And the FOIA officer says, okay, because they can't come in and search your computer. They're not going to sit there. So they're just taking your word at face value. And you're like, look, man, I'm in the middle of writing a PowerPoint presentation for the boss. I've got 30 minutes to get it done. And now I've got the FOIA request saying you need an answer now. Well, guess what? I got nothing to respond to. Action passed, action completed. I'm not saying that's right, but that's how oftentimes it works.
Question from Jeanne. Is there one aspect of the phenomenon that Lue finds to be extremely concerning or frightening?
Wow, Jeanne. I think the most frightening aspect of the phenomenon really doesn't concern the phenomenon. It involves our own human nature and how we turn against each other when faced with potentially information that is existential. Um, we're a fragile species emotionally, and anytime you challenge someone's beliefs or the way that they view the universe, the very, very first reaction is to fight, and it's disbelief. No, 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 I'm not wrong. You're wrong. And we have a hard time really changing our views, even in the face of new evidence. We would rather reject the evidence in favor of our own preconceived opinions, and that's problematic because real science doesn't work that way. Real science is about constant evaluation and reevaluation of your hypothesis and testing those hypotheses, and being your own worst critic, because that's how you find flaws in theories, and you have to be willing to find flaws in your own theories. You have to look in the mirror, and you have to be able to do that. And this topic is, it's so mysterious, and it has a potential for our species in such a profound way that there's a lot of people who just can't even conceive it. They'd rather spend their time, you know, watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And again, nothing wrong with that, but when given a choice, do you want to have a conversation about potentially something that is relevant to our entire species and our existence? A lot of people, going back to the old cliche of the Matrix movie, they'll go for that blue pill every time. They think they want the red pill, but in reality, they don't. They want the blue pill. They want to remain comfortable in the little shiny box that they've created for themselves with limitations and boundaries. And okay, this is where I am. This is who I am, and this is where I fit. Um, People are very uncomfortable with the unknown. It's just the way we are as a species. We don't like the unknown, and that's why governments and religions and institutions are so important, because we expect them to have answers for us, and when they don't, it makes us very uncomfortable. And this is a topic where there's a lot more questions than there are answers right now, and it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So they tend to focus on other things, I guess. And by the way, that's not a bad thing. It's not, I'm not saying this to try to make anyone feel terrible, or make anybody feel bad for not considering this topic a serious topic. Um, it's just the way we are as a species. We don't like unanswered questions, and it's probably an evolutionary thing. Probably goes back to the you know our instinct of fight or flight, because something that is unknown, something that we don't recognize, could be a potential threat, and therefore we're afraid of it, right? Or we fight it, one of the two. And so yeah, there you have it. I think that's probably the biggest fear I have regarding this topic. Isn't the topic itself, it's our reaction to the topic.
I've got two more listener questions from Michelle.
Okay.
Are there sensors in use by the US military that are tasked to be specifically track anomalous signatures with parameters guided by UAP encounters?
Woo! Can't answer that question. Great question, Michelle. But unfortunately, I cannot. We have capabilities that certainly have the technical capabilities to track UAP. But are those deliberately focusing on UAP? I cannot unfortunately elaborate on that.
Final question from Mike. How would your family say you have changed since 2007, i.e. before you started at AATIP?
You'd have to ask them. I wouldn't want to answer for my family. I think they'd probably tell you I'm exactly the same. I've always been this way. I've always been Lue Elizondo, not trying to be anything or anybody else. I've always approached challenges the same way. Try to be open-minded, try to be aware of my own cognitive bias when I can, and try to keep it in check. Always be careful of pride and ego interfering with the pursuit of truth. I don't think I've changed at all. I've always kind of, I think, been this way. But again, you'd have to ask them, because the question is really, how do they see me, right? And not how do I see me? And those are two different things. I suspect they would tell you that, but ultimately, maybe set up an interview with talk to my wife, maybe talk to my kids, and ask them that question. I have no problem with you asking.
I'd happily do that, and I'm sure people would like to hear from them as well, if they would happily get in front of a mic and or camera. Lou, our time is almost up, and you've mentioned that you're, for various reasons, going to be stepping away in the near future from these sorts of appearances for an amount of time. I would hope, selfishly, that's not for too long, but we don't know. I just want to give you the floor to finish the podcast, to speak to the audience and give some final words on advice, how you're feeling, and just, what they can do going forward.
Well, first of all, Andy and Dan, let me thank you guys profoundly for the service you're providing for the rest of us chickens. It's very, very appreciated. And of course, to your audience, for taking the time to spend with us here today and listen. Know this: you are the most important piece to this equation. Every single one of you in the audience. It's not me. It's not Andy. It's not Dan. It's you. We're doing this for you because ultimately you're going to have to make a decision, not me. And that decision is this topic important enough that we need to continue to pursue this as a species? Maybe it's not. That's not up to me. That responsibility falls in your lap. And so I hope that you continue this pioneering spirit of asking questions, to include even asking me and challenging me. I think it's important, because ultimately you deserve the answers. Whatever those answers are, I think you deserve those answers. And I guess as far as my advice is, don't stop asking the questions. Be fearless in your pursuit of the truth, wherever that truth may lie. Because ultimately, it's for you. You deserve it. Don't let other people make a decision on your behalf whether or not you deserve information. That those days are over. You now have the ability and the power in your hands to make that decision yourself. I wouldn't be so quick to obfuscate that or just give it away to anybody else, because that's sacred. So I guess that would be my advice to anybody in the audience who wants to know what my position is and what my advice to you is.
That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/thatUFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a Tic Tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass. Meditative game of state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys, they thought this was noise, they thought it was a dream, they thought it was my toys, they thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jay? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life,